Hello and welcome back. In this video we're going to be talking about borders and backgrounds, and I've created a file called 05 underscore border underscore background.html, and the only thing I've done besides adding the boilerplate is to change the title to borders and backgrounds. And then I also did some slight modification here, a little housekeeping, where I decided to put things in place. I collected that style tag that was here, that CSS file, and then I added it. That was an external style sheet we used in the first video, so I added it here. So if we are working on other examples that requires us to use CSS, instead of allowing it to lie all over the place, we are going to be storing it inside this folder, and then we'll be referring to it. And I also created another folder called img, which is used to represent images, and then inside of this I added two images. The first one is clothes.jpg and the other one is superman.png. so this is where I got the images from. I checked on Google logo png, and then I got this Superman logo, which I collected. And then the other one is from Unsplash. I looked for a fashion image. I searched for fashion on Unsplash, and I picked this one, which you can use any image of your choice. And this is the image here. So let's move further. Now we're going to be using them. Now the reason why I had to use images with tool extension, this one is a JPEG and this one is a PNG. JPEG will work often, but if you want an image that requires a transparent background, you are supposed to use a PNG file, as you're going to see in this example I'll give you. So what we're going to do now, we're going to add our style tag here. Remember, because of the fact that we don't want to be switching between files, that's why we're putting an internal style sheet here. I'll add a div here, and if you remember very well, div is like a container which actually does nothing, but it only helps in styling. That means if we want to style a particular container the way we want, as we're going to see as we progress here, we are going to be using div, and most times we are going to be using a class or an ID. An ID is just used for one container. If you use an ID for one container, you shouldn't use it in any other container. So in this case, we are going to be using an ID. I'll call this ID box1, and then inside this I'll give a h2 tag, and I'll call the heading box1, and I'll also give a paragraph of some, say, 30 text. So then I'll duplicate this. I'll hold down my shift and my option on Windows, or shift on Mac rather, or shift and alt on your Windows, and you press this 3 more times. I want this to be 4. So now in this I'll call this box2, I'll call this box3, I'll call this box4. Now the reason why we're giving an ID of the container is so that we can reference that in the style sheet. So, and then I'll give this a heading of box2, box3, and box4. I'll save. So let's run this in our live server. I'll click here to go live, and I'll want to, so we have this. I won't be putting this side by side because I want us to use the whole of the space, so I'll just be switching between them. Let's close this now and let's begin to style. So how do we target the first box? Remember, if you want to target an ID, you use the pound symbol, pound box1. Now what we're going to do now is to add a background color. So for you to add a background color, you're going to use the property of background color. So with this we can give a background color. We've talked about colors, so in this case let's use a beige color. So if I save now and switch here, you can see now that we have a beige color here, and that is the first way we can add background color. Now the next thing we're going to see is if we want to add a border to this. Adding a border, it requires 3 properties. The first one is the width of the border, and you use border width to represent that, and then the width of the border just represent how thick you want the border to be. So if I say I want it to be, let's say, 5 pixels, and I save this, if we look at this, nothing happens because all 3 properties have to come together for this to work. Now, so the next property is the border color. And for border color, I'll just use this first one. No, it's almost the same, so let's change it. Let's say brown. And if I save and check, still nothing happens. The third property needs to be available, which is the style of the border. So border style, and the border style, you can see there are a lot of styles here, but the one that is often used is solid. So if I give a style of solid and I save now, so you can see we have a border of 5 pixel, solid, and brown in color. So that is that for border. But we can use all of these together instead of writing each and every one of them. So it's just simply using the border, and it doesn't matter the order you put this, just ensure that you put all three of these. So I'll start with solid, and then 5 pixel, and let's say brown. So I'll delete this completely, so you see it's not working, it's not available again. So if I save now, you see it still remains, and you can see that this is closely at the edge. We are going to look at that in the next video, but let's move further. That is the first way we can do this. Now I'll just put this other one back, so, and I'll comment it here like so. Although there's a shortcut for this, but I prefer using the shortcut when I'm working on the external style sheet, so you can see that and refer to it. So that is how we can do our border. Now I'll target the second container, the second div, using the hashtag box 2. So what do we do here? The first thing we're going to do here is to give a background color. Now instead of using background color, you can also use background, and it works very well. So if I use a background, and now I'll use an RGB color, we've talked about this based on preference, and I'll give 51, 50, 51, 51, 51, just to get a dark shade there. So if I save and run here, you can see we have this, but now we can't see the text properly. So what I'm going to do now is to give the color of the text as, I'm supposed to close this here, so to give the color of the text as white. So we can see that properly now. Now let's say we want the border to just come at the bottom. We'll just do something like this. Instead of just border, we'll do something like border bottom, and then let's say we want to give the border bottom as let's say 2 pixel, solid, green. There we don't need these commas. 2 pixel, solid, green. So if I save now, you can see we only have that border at the bottom. Let's make this big so we can see very well. 5 pixel. So now we have this. Another property of the border we're going to be looking at is the border radius. The border radius is a means you use to give a curve at the border, and it is very simple to use. So I'll come to this first one. Let's add a border radius of, let's say, 10 pixels. So if I save now, you can see we have this smooth curve at the edges, and you can see that there. So moving forward, we can also say, let's just give, in this second one, let's say we want to give the border just at these bottom edges here. So we just have to target them. I'll do them one after the other. So we have to first of all target the left edge like so, border bottom, left radius. So I'll give this 10 pixel, and if we see here, you can see this is only curved at this place. So if we duplicate this and then change this to right and save, you'll see it's applied on both sides. Let's take the third border, the third container, using box 3. I believe you're beginning to understand how this div is used. So using box 3, and now we want to use some of these images we have here. We can do something like background image, and then we have to look for where the image is, and then we do that using the URL, and then inside this URL you're going to put these quotes, and then you can look for image online by typing the link if you can get the HTTP and so on. But now we want to get from our local machine here, which is this. So what we do is we start, because it is, if we look at this image, this folder is inside here where we have this. So you start with ./img, and then inside here, what is it saved with? We want to target the clothes.jpg /clothes.jpg. So if we save this now, we can see we are having the image here, but we can't see all of it because the image is quite big. So let's go further to see how we can modify this so we can see everything. But if I want it to get a specific width and height so we can see some part of it, I can give a height of, let's say, I always forget closing this, I can give a height of, let's say, 600 pixels, and let's say a width of 400 pixels. So if I save this now, we can see we see some part of the image but not everything because it is a very large image. But I believe you get the picture. So let's go further and see some other things we can see and some attributes you can do. So another thing we can do is a kind of make this image show so that we can see everything. So how we do that is using an attribute which is called the background size. And if we use the background size as cover, we want it to cover everything. So if we save now, you can see we can see the whole image even though it's shrinked, but you get the picture of it. So I'll make this quite bigger. Instead of width of 400, let's make it a width of, let's say, 900, and we save. So we can see most of it now. Okay, now moving forward, another thing we can do here is a kind of positioning. We can position this, and we position based on the X and Y axis. So this is what we mean. We'll do something like background position, and in the position we can do something like, let's say, 100 pixel by 100 pixel on the X and Y axis. So if we save this now, you'll see something that this image moved down a bit from here. It moved down a bit, but there is one attribute which we should take care of now, which is by default called repeat. So you can see that the end of this image, instead of we just move this thing down, but you can see this end of this image is showing here, and then this bottom part is also showing, and we don't want that. So how we take care of that is by using a background repeat attribute. And we use no repeat. So if we do that now, this is going to work fine. You can see this has moved from the X between the X and Y axis. So most of the times when you want to use your image, you have to put your repeat to no repeat so that the image will not continue to repeat itself. This video is getting quite long, but I want to cover everything related to backgrounds and borders. So if I am to change this to on the X axis to, let's say, 300, and I save, you'll see now it has moved away from the edge again by 300 pixels. So I'll remove this now, or I'll just comment this out so you can know that this exists. I'll comment here. Alright, so we have our image back to how it should be without repeating and all that. So if it was a small image, and it would have stretched all over because we use no repeat, and we used cover, so it will cover everywhere. But if you don't use the cover, the image will just be at some point if it is a small image. So you need to be using images of good quality, but you also have to consider the size of the image so that you don't use something that will be too large. Now, instead of giving out all of these attributes, there is one other way we can do it, and instead of using this, I'll use it, then I'll remove all of this again. It's just using background, and then for the background we want to use a URL. I'll copy this and paste in here, and then after that we want to use no repeat. We don't want it to repeat, and after that we want the image to be center, and then we also want it to cover. We also do center cover. So if I save this and I remove all of these, you see that we still have the same thing, but I remove the background, but you can get the picture. So if I should include the background again here, height of 600 pixels and width of 900 pixels, so you can see we get that again with just using some little things. All right, now the next thing we're going to do is the fourth image, the fourth box, and targeting using box 4, which is the ID here for this fourth one. So what we want to do in this case is that we want to get that image from the other one, so we can use the background, and for the background we are using the URL, and inside that we are targeting the image folder, and inside the image folder we want superman.png. So if we save now and come here, we can see what we have now. This is an example. You can see it begins to repeat, but this is not what we want. So let's add the other attributes to this. The first one is no repeat, and then the next one is center. We want it to be centered, and center cover, so that it covers. So if we save this now, we can see it's stretched. Now we don't want it to stretch as well, so let's remove this center. This, instead of using center cover, let's place it to be at the center. That means it is at the center of the x-axis and the y-axis. So if we save now, you can see we have it in the middle. And then what we can do now is, I'll try to make this big so we can see. So I'll copy this p tag here, and I'll duplicate it several times. So if I save now and come back here, we can see this. Let me reduce this a bit so we get that kind of scrolling effect. So if I reduce this a bit now, okay, we can see we have, this is what we have here. Now I can see the background, which means this is not what I really wanted. I just had to get this image, so I'll explain this. But if you want to do this, you have to take this to Photoshop and they kind of edit this background out. But I believe you understand what I'm saying. Okay, now we have this. I want a situation where while I'm scrolling this image, this one does not scroll. So how do we do that? We use another attribute which is known as let's still come back here, which is known as background attachment, and we set it to fixed. So if I save and come back here, so if I scroll, you will see that it is fixed at a spot. So that is what it does. So we have said a lot in this video. Let me just give a quick recap of what we talked about. We started by giving a background color, and instead of using just background color, we can as well as use background, and depending on the color you wish to use, whether you want to use this using normal words or RGB or using the hex colors, it's just your wish. And then you, for the background, for the border, you can give 3 attributes, which is the solid, the size, and then the color. They all have to work together. Then we talked about how we can use radius to give that edge, that curved edge, to our borders. And then in this second one, we saw that we can apply the border to any position. In this case, we use the bottom. So that means if we want to use it at the top, we just have to change this to top, and then it will be applied. And then if we want, we can also modify this. Well, instead of bottom left, bottom right, we can use top left, top right. I believe you get that. And then we also saw how we can collect image. I told us of the different properties we can use, and then I put them all together into one. And then in this case, we're looking at the x-axis and the y-axis. For the x-axis, we want it to be at the center, and then for the y-axis, we want it to be at the center as well as cover. And then we gave a height, and then the same thing here, but now we don't want it to cover, we just want it to be at the center of the container. And then we passed in an attribute of fixed, so that it is fixed even when you scroll. And when we go to some live projects, you see how we're going to use them. So in the next video, we're going to be looking at the box model and see how we can begin to put paddings and margins to our projects.